Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Navigation with Warren Miller, brought to you by ITS. This webinar series is centered around regulation-related topics that cover high-level compliance requirements and give an opportunity for you to learn something new, validate what you may already know, and ask questions affecting your operations. Today, we will review some of the upcoming changes to the final rule that impact the safety of gas transmission pipelines, including new repair criteria and cathodic protection requirements for transmission lines, as well as management of change. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping to ensure this experience is beneficial to all of you. This session will be recorded, as you heard the message just a moment ago from the Zoom webinar. As a gentle reminder, the information and views expressed in this webinar series may be opinion and do not constitute legal advice and should not be utilized as your only source of information. Please review the disclaimer on screen before acting on any advice given and seek guidance from legal counsel or other applicable experts if you have questions, issues, or concerns. We will have time at the end where you can anonymously ask questions about these regulations or other compliance concerns that we've discussed. To do so, you'll type those questions into the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar interface. Hi, I'm Chris Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Learning and Compliance at ITS, and I'm here to facilitate this discussion. And with me, as always, is ITS Regulatory Compliance Specialist Warren Miller. Warren, thanks for joining us today.
You bet, Chris.
And Warren, I think just to everyone's knowledge right now, we are having a few technical difficulties. Warren's webcam is not working right now, so he'll just be a voice at this time. So let's jump into this session. So Warren, although PHMSA put a stay of enforcement on the final rule until February 24th of 2024, so in just over a year from now, in quotes, what they said was to ensure careful, timely, and complete implementation. So they put the brakes on, or they say they put a stay of enforcement out. Why should operators still act now to begin updating their compliance programs?
Well, Chris, although PHMSA placed a stay of enforcement on most of this, it actually, there are some parts that operators have to go ahead and act upon. Although PHMSA said they will provide guidance, operators should not wait before starting to make some of the decisions and developing procedures, especially if they have a MOC process in place that requires folks to review, because there's quite a bit of information in this final rule that could take some time to develop. When the stay is over, the new requirements will be in effect and operators will be held to them. And currently there's not been any information about when PHMSA will release this guidance, bringing it out to operators. But certainly May 24th of this year, operators are going to have to start integrating elements that 192, 917B states. And then again, February 24th of next year, everything would become in effect at that point.
So before we dig into the regulation changes themselves, are there any specific details we should know about this stay of enforcement itself? I think you already hinted at a couple. It's not a stay of enforcement of the entire thing.
Correct. Yeah. A lot of people have never dealt with a stay of enforcement, and this one doesn't apply to all the changes. It's delayed for only those operators of existing onshore gas transmission in service as of the publication date of the rule, which was August 24th of 2022. So anything that's new or replaced after August 24th of 22. So here we are in 23, have got to comply with this regulation. Additionally, 192.13D addresses the use of a management of change process. So operators are required to go ahead and develop a management of change process if they don't already have one in place. And it's got to be used to evaluate and mitigate, as necessary, the significant changes that could pose a risk to safety or the environment on actions that they do in their operating of their pipeline. And then also up in integrity management, I talked about 917B, addresses identifying potential threats to pipeline integrity. Again, there's a lot of information in this final rule about the elements, and PHMSA has spelled them out in granular detail, that these have got to be specified. You've got to be starting to integrate them by May 24th of this year. And then you've got to have everything integrated by February 26th of next year.
So is this stay of enforcement just at the federal level? I'd imagine so. But how will states react, or do they typically honor these? How does that work?
Well, PHMSA has requested that the states follow this stay of enforcement, but an state can impose this final rule on interstate pipelines. So they don't have to. I believe most states will likely follow the stay of enforcement. One, since there's not any guidance provided by PHMSA on what the operator should be doing, states would really not know exactly what they're supposed to be inspecting to. And one of the thing about these last two requirements that we were talking about, for the management of change and potential threat identification portions, an operator could request an extension up to 1 year to get those done for their program if they file it within 90 days of that February 26th of 24 deadline, and they'd have to go through the electronic notification request.
So even more reason to be digging into this, and many operators I'm sure already are getting ahead of this, and sounds like you do have some flexibility with even requesting extensions to comply. Thanks for the explanation on stay of enforcement. That's always kind of interesting to me on how some of this works. So let's get to our first point for today's webinar. So what we typically do is we create 5 takeaways. Now this rule is, as Warren pointed out, highly technical, and there's a lot to it. So what we're going to do is hit the what's in our view some of the biggest points, impactful points coming out of this rule. And the first one is that this rule gives very prescriptive repair criteria. And Warren, how granular are we talking about here?
They're actually very prescriptive. And remember that this is that third part of the mega rule. And this is coming from those 2 major accidents that occurred in San Bruno and up in Marshall, Michigan. So we're looking at, 10, 12 years in the making, a lot of discussion points. So they've had time to look at all of the issues that were found in both of those accidents, of course, with input from NTSB and Congress. So this granular requirement is, going to be, what we're going to be living with. So certainly for external corrosion, we're talking about developing a plan and applying for permits within 6 months that you've got some issues. So they're not, operators can't sit back and not take any action. They're requiring, and they will be looking for dates of when you found an issue within that 6 months, did you apply if you had to have a permit? But then they have a remediation timeline. So they're actually calling it out and putting it on the operators. So within whichever is earliest, before the next test interval or inspection. So depending on, what area the external corrosion is on within 1 year, not to not to exceed 15 months from the deficiency identification, or as soon as practicable, not to exceed 6 months after obtaining the permits. So they're calling it out. And another thing they called out was anything that appears to be a systemic cause has got to be investigated with close interval surveys, which we'll talk about in just a little bit.
So it's very prescriptive timelines for repair. What are the requirements for interference current issues?
Again, they've just used to be a short blurb about interference, but now they're going again specific. So when to cut and tuck these interference surveys, if an operator is aware of significant increases of stray current found. So they're going to be looking for operators to actually be doing those investigations to see if there's stray current on their facilities. So if new pipelines come into the right of way or new overhead lines, again, that would be new potential stray currents that are introduced, but making sure that you've done surveys to see if it's affecting your pipeline or not. And then again, you have to develop a plan and apply for those permits again within 6 months. So if you're on BLM land or Corps of Engineers to get into that to do some work, once you know that you've got this interference, they're wanting people to be proactive about this. And then the remediation timeline, very similar to the external corrosion, within 15 months of completing that survey. So then that's being remediated. And then as soon as practical, not to exceed the 6 months after obtaining those permits. So PHMSA is going to be looking at dates. They're going to be looking at those records, those completed records of when those surveys, anything's been done, and then they're going to be checking to make sure the operators have been moving forward with any type of remediation that's required.
And thanks, Warren. Just to cover some basics for those that may not be aware, what are interference currents and how are they caused and why does it matter?
Well, certainly the overhead power lines, other pipelines, if they are being protected by their cathodic protection system, sometimes there's bleed over current, and this current can actually interfere with an operator's corrosion program and cause external. Give you an example. Up in Anchorage, Alaska, there's a dock system right there on where the oh my gosh, I just lost the name of the bay, where the water comes into the bay there, and they have a large high voltage protection system on that dock, which interferes actually with the distribution system in that area. And I know that they've remediated that, but that's one of those examples.
Excellent. So yeah, so cathodic protection systems use electrical current to help protect the pipeline, and then if you have interference from these outside sources, then it's not protecting the pipeline. That kind of sums it up. Well, thanks for explaining that. There are also other repair criteria that are now specified for repairs not covered under subpart O. What are those?
So again, subpart O is the integrity management program. It already has specified timelines and certain kind of conditions and what must be repaired for those lines. And typically that's, the high consequence area. And the alternate AMLP is for those special systems that actually operate above 72% SMICE. So these are all the rest of the lines across the country. So they've actually made specific criteria that under immediate repair, 2-year conditions and monitored conditions. So Under immediate repair, they've got specific information about if you've got a pipeline that has this kind of dent or this kind of corrosion, it is immediate repair and must be handled so. And then 2 years conditions, again, are less urgent, but still are required to be repaired. And then there will be monitored conditions, just like there are in the integrity management program, that you monitor, but you have to, resurvey, make sure that nothing's changing. And then, of course, if it does change to meet a condition of the 2-year immediate, then you'd have to get your repairs.
Was anything addressed regarding internal corrosion?
Yes. Again, they went very went specific about. I'm sorry, I've just lost my.
It's all good.
Just lost my note here. I apologize for that. They've got monitoring, which is underneath 478, 192, 478, that they've got for mitigating and monitoring for internal corrosion. And certainly if you do have corrosive gas, you've got to have a monitoring and a program to monitor it. And if you've got any type of potential corrosion, you've got to repair it. And it does talk about the use of gas quality monitoring equipment. It talks about the evaluations at least once each calendar year, intervals not exceeding 15 months, to make sure that the gas is being maintained correctly and monitored, mitigated. And then an operator also has to review its monitoring program at least once each calendar year, not exceed 15 months, and make sure that it's correct and make adjustments if their process is actually not doing what it needs to do.
Thank you for that. So point number one, very prescriptive repair criteria on a number of fronts. And it sounds like there's a lot to sort out between external corrosion, interference currents, and those criteria, the other criteria that covers all the other transmission repairs. Besides planning for repairs and adopting new timelines, PHMSA also updated and created new and revised definitions for Part 192. From what I understand, Warren, these are very important, a very important part of the regulations. How do operators use these? Why are they important?
Well, certainly the addition of a definition is to help them describe what's going to be required in the parts of the code that they've added or amended. So an operator uses these definitions to say, okay, well, this affects me, or this doesn't affect me, or under this certain condition, I'm going to be affected and I need to know what I need to do.
Let's get into some of the specific definitions that were, for instance, added. Let's start with the new ones.
Close interval survey, this is a requirement that, operators use close interval surveys when they find these systemic deficiencies with their cathodic protection levels for external corrosion. It was never specifically called out that they use close interval surveys, but now they will have to. These systemic conditions would be, say, over 4 or 5 miles of pipe. You've got a really low area, not just a single test station, but it's a longer stretch, maybe a short lateral. Wouldn't be systemic because you may have a lead that has fallen off of a rectifier or something like that. But certainly this close interval survey, a lot of operators do use them, but it's actually called it out for more now.
All right. Distribution centers, that's a new one, isn't it?
It is. Distribution center is now specifically defined to further, add the separation between distribution and transmission facilities. Um, One of the things it talks about is the initial point where gas enters piping used primarily to deliver gas to customers who purchase it for consumption opposed to resale. And this includes metering locations, pressure reduction locations, and locations where there is a reduction in gas volume. So it's given operators that much more information in how to determine what systems they have.
And on screen, I know there's these are additional definitions that we're not really going to get into, right? But
no, and like I said, they're spelled out and very, very clear about what they're intended. Again, understanding that PHMSA has defined it because somewhere in this final rule, they're addressing it with certain requirements and wanting to make sure that it's crystal clear. Operator knows what PHMSA considers a wrinkle bend or a hard spot. The inline inspection. There used to be, definitions are put in when they are not the same as a Webster dictionary. Okay. So they have, either defined it more critical or added additional information that would not typically be found in Webster dictionary. And that's why they're in here like this.
Something that's significant within the definition then that would translate into how, so operators, it sounds like you really should look at these definitions and make sure you understand what PHMSA understands to be a wrinkle bend, for instance.
Correct.
Yeah. Were there any definitions that were revised?
There was one revision, and it's transmission line. So transmission line now has a fourth opportunity. An operator can voluntarily designate that their pipeline is a transmission pipeline. So the first three have been very standardized: transports gas from a gathering line or storage facility to a distribution center, operates at a hoop stress of 20% more of SMICE, transports gas within a storage field, or. So the first three are, you meet this definition if you are here, but this allows somebody who actually has a distribution system, in certain cases, I'm assuming, to call themselves a transmission pipeline. And that would be, I assume once they've designated that, they probably aren't going to be allowed to go back. But again, that's my assumption. I'm hoping PHMSA actually provides guidance on what this last bullet really is meaning.
Yeah, I'd be curious as to, for those operators who or not who, but why would this be advantageous? That'd be interesting. So 2 points down, we've covered so far, and we're going to be hitting 5. So let's get into some of the specific topics covered in the reg change. Warren, let's discuss new assessments of pipelines after installing 1,000 feet or more in a ditch. Can you explain what's now required when it's this in this scenario for transmission pipelines?
Yeah, 192.13 talks about that an operator must perform a baseline assessment within 6 months of placing that pipeline in service. So this will include new construction, or if you're adding in new pipe, and it's 1,000 feet or more continuous length, which triggers this requirement. Again, it does include new construction, and it's assessing for that coating damage. So not just, during normal construction, coating is inspected with a Jeep or something like that. But now they are looking for operators to actually utilize technology to assess for coating damage after the fact. And if damage is found, they've got to make repairs. And if they're using technology other than what's accepted or stated in 319, then they've got to notify PHMSA 90 days prior to using that technology. And PHMSA has the opportunity to say yes or no, or if they don't respond at all, then the operator can go ahead and use that new technology. And this comes from a lot of pipe that gets put in, but it's amazing the number of defects that are found later on after a pipe's been put in the ground that was damaged possibly by the last handling of the pipe going in, or it's put on rocks. There's just a number of things that there's this reason, for this.
So it sounds like that's kind of the why it's covering new construction, is to really just make sure that there's a baseline assessment and that pipe was installed without damage during the installation.
Right.
Now we're getting into some more prescriptive and highly technical aspects of the regulation change. There are now specific requirements for using ICDA, or internal corrosion direct assessments, and direct assessments for stress corrosion cracking. So that's a mouthful, just to start. As I understand, Warren, these new requirements are incorporated by reference, by NACE. Warren, what does that mean when a standard is incorporated by reference?
PHMSA has the authority to review a standard, and when it says incorporate by reference, is take that document, all or part of it, and actually require it to be utilize it as code, for the lack of a better word. And this incorporation by reference can be, again, part of it or all of it. And when the standard says should or could, should, it becomes a must or a shall in regulation. So what had been used as folks with just a standard not incorporated by reference is a guidance. And then once it becomes incorporated, it becomes the regulation. And this has occurred. There are a large number of standards that have already been incorporated by reference. And NACE is the National Association of Corrosion Engineers. This is a current standard under them.
It makes sense. So in other words, not reinventing the wheel. PHMSA is not trying to rewrite all the great work that's gone into creating these technical standards. For instance, this NACE example. So are these new requirements incorporated by reference related to new technology, or is it essentially just bringing in established best practice into regulation?
Chris, this technology has been around, but PHMSA is now putting specific language addressing its use. Folks, some folks have utilized this technology prior, but now PHMSA is saying this will be used in these circumstances to evaluate, for the internal corrosion, and they've just made it. They've drawn the line in the sand to say you're going to use it.
I understand. So 927 ICD, or internal corrosion direct inspections. Man, tell us more about that.
Well, the thing about it, if you look in this final rule, 927 and 929 cover a lot of pages. Again, understand if you print this out, it's in 3 columns, very small font, and detailed, very explicit detail, just like the ICDA talks about. You have to have a plan, talks about the pre-assessment, talks about indirect inspection, the detailed exam that you've got to perform, and then post-assessment evaluation and monitoring. So it lists out a program for doing this work. 929 is very similar. So that direct inspection for stress, corrosion, cracking, operators, and again, these both 927 follows the NACE SPO 206 and 929 follows SPO 204. So they have, very specific requirements in there, and will help an operator develop the plan, understand what they've got to do, and then mitigate and follow up for the evaluation. So again, a lot of information that's in there. This will, whoever is responsible for at your company would be needing to really dig into this and understand the requirements.
So I imagine operators already using or utilizing 204 and 206 are going to be in really good shape already.
It would be, yes.
Probably. That leads us to our final major topic we're covering during this webinar. PHMSA is addressing management of change and the requirements that operators are going to have to follow for that. So what should operators consider when developing their management of change, Warren?
Well, the thing is that there are a number of operators that have already had management of change and may not have covered their whole program. It may have been just their OQ program or their O&M program or integrity management. But this is going to require looking at a process for evaluating and mitigating the significant changes that could pose a risk to the safety or the environment. Very explicit, and it's going to be something there's a lot of documentation involved, picking the right people who are involved with the management of change. Got to follow the ASME ANSI B318S section 11 on this. And this one must be implemented by February 26th of 24. And this is for those pipelines that are all of them except for the ones that are in the integrity management program already. So for operations, for all the other lines, except for integrity management, they've got to have this MOC. Now, some operators may use the MOC that they've already got for their integrity management, have it as maybe a subset, or maybe as even a standalone MOC. But again, making sure that they've looked at that section 11 to make sure they're following that. And again, operators can request an extension up to 1 year in getting this put together. But make sure if you're going to get that extension request in, at least 90 days ahead of time.
Some great advice. So is this an area that you anticipate will be certainly scrutinized if there were an operator were to have God forbid, a future incident? Do you think that management of change will definitely be something that's more top of mind for regulators to look into?
I think it would, especially if they made a choice and, they didn't, let's say they didn't identify the risk that ended up causing the incident. Again, it's after the fact, but if nothing more, it would be a learning opportunity, again, for that operator to say, okay, we did not think of that threat, for that change and what it did to us. And it would be a learning, and of course it would be learning for everybody across the country who has opportunity to hear about it.
Well, thank you so much, Warren. If you've joined us late, we announced at the beginning when we have technical difficulty. Otherwise, we'd be looking at Warren's smiling face right now. Um, but good to hear from you. And now we are getting to nearing the end of the webinar. So this is a great time for you to get some questions you may have into that Q&A chat feature here in Zoom. So clicking on the bottom, the more, if it's not just readily available, you'll find it. Be able to type your question in. It will be anonymous, and we'll answer it. So while we wait for your questions to come in, we already have a few. We're going to recap our 5 main topics that we covered this webinar. Warren, take us away.
You bet. This rule is very descriptive about the repair criteria, external corrosion, internal corrosion, interference current issues. Again, it's something that PHMSA has really stepped up and made those specific areas and how it's going to be done. And that'll have to be, again, implemented by each operator. New definitions, certainly close interval survey, and then distinctions between transmission and distribution is clearly defined. You'll need to add those in, especially if they, where you, if you're utilizing any of the new requirements that would require those definitions, that'd be something you'd want to make sure is added into your program also. The baseline assessment for transmission operators having to perform if they're adding 1,000 feet or more of pipe in a ditch. They've got 6 months, which is a pretty fast timeline to get back out there within 6 months after the line is in service. So you can construct it, but once you energize that line, your 6-month window starts for having this survey, this assessment, baseline assessment completed. The regulation, of course, now defines use of direct assessment for internal corrosion and stress corrosion cracking, and influenced by the NACE standards, following those standards to make sure you're doing it right per that scrutiny. And then again, operators are going to have to develop that management change process for any pipeline that's outside of their integrity management program, where significant changes could put risk to the safety or environment.
Thank you for the recapping our takeaways from this new final rule about to go into effect. Warren, we'll send out these takeaways and include a link to the final rule in our follow-up email following the webinar. Again, we highly recommend that you and your teams review the rule in its entirety and be prepared and do not delay. Even though you do have a stay of enforcement that'll hopefully help you implement these changes. At this time, we'd again like to talk through any of your questions that you may have. If you haven't done so yet, you still can get them in. Use that Q&A feature in Zoom to send them in. And if we don't get to your questions on air, it looks like we have some time here though, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually. And so please ask away. A few questions, let's get started. Warren, can you provide more information on regulation 192.478, specifically B1? So they're asking specifically how operators should be defining or interpreting the word points. Can you take, what do you think?
This is dealing with that internal corrosion about monitoring and mitigation. So I'm going to assume this would probably be where there's a transfer or a sales point where you're getting gas from maybe a storage field, production field, another operator. Typically, if operator is not an issue, but certainly from a storage field and sales points would be those places where you're introducing new gas into your system, making sure that it's it's not corrosive.
Thank you. Another question, can we use the new distribution center definition to reclassify transmission lines to distribution lines? And I think we heard we can, but.
Again, I understand the question correctly, although no guidance has been provided by PHMSA, an operator could use, sorry, say that one more time.
Yeah, and I may have actually said the word center in there. Sorry. So can we use, here's the question verbatim. Can we use the new distribution definition to, which I don't know there was a new distribution definition, but I guess the new transmission revision.
Right.
Can they use that to reclassify transmission lines down to distribution? That's what they're asking.
I did not see anything that allows it to go that direction.
Right.
Distribution center, unless somebody has a new take on distribution center or something like that, I don't know that you could reclassify transmission to distribution without, again, changing operational settings.
Understand. Okay. Another question, are there any provisions included that affect lower distribution companies or local distribution companies, operators that are just running distribution systems?
I'm thinking the one that I saw that stands out, well, two, would be those new and amended definitions, and then also the revision of 613, which is the continuing surveillance. They added quite a bit of information about extreme weather and natural disasters, and the follow-up to take a look at your system to make sure everything is okay and protected and things like that. So they added quite a bit of language in that continuing surveillance that had never been there before.
Great info. And here's another one. In consideration of section 465, specifically F2, how would you characterize the use of the word systemic to describe inadequate cathodic protection?
Again, as kind of talked about, I believe this is, over a long, more than an area of just a single test station. So there's an issue possibly with two rectifiers being affected and affecting 20 or 30 miles, around a rectifier, ground beds, things like that could be considered systemic, but I really feel like it's going to be that long term where you've got to do that close interval survey to find out, exactly what's affecting, drawing, let's say something's drawing down your CP reads, and, maybe a new line has been placed on around your system and it's affecting not a single point test lead or something like that. You'd find just doing your CP monitoring.
Thank you. Will any of the new regulations lead to changes or an increased requirement for more or new OQ testing and certification? So I guess asking, does any of the final rules kind of dictate the need for more field personnel qualifications or new covered tasks?
It's possible depending on the operator's action. If an operator, changes designation of distribution to a transmission line, they may have covered tasks that they hadn't had before. And so that would, precipitate needing to have people qualified to do that. The new assessment methods for internal and external corrosion may require an operator to also include those as their covered task, as applicable. If they already have them, great. And then same with the use of DCVG or ACVG on that newly installed pipe. Again, if operators not used that technology before, then there's that consideration. And I think that's pretty much what I came up with on that.
Okay. Here's some questions coming in from chat or from the Q&A feature. Do these rules apply to wholesale RMP or PSM bulk storage facilities?
Bulk storage facilities. Sorry, I don't think it does. This is for the onshore gas transmission for the most part. That's not under integrity management. I don't know that it's really about the facilities unless the possibility of the monitoring, if they needed to monitor for that internal corrosion about the gas quality. That'd be the only one I can think of right this second.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, no direct indication that comes to mind, but possibly.
Correct. Nothing was called out.
Yeah. So let's see. How can a pipe be assessed? And I think this is around the 1,000 feet in a ditch. How can a pipe be assessed if it's bored hydraulically or HDD, horizontal drilling? and is that even covered? I mean, to me, it's like pipe in a ditch is not boring, but I'm not an expert.
You know, that's a really good question. Let me see here. Wanted to just check the language. Promptly after a ditch is backfilled. So technically, from what I can read, that does not, that would not require the bored pipe would not meet 319 for that requirement.
So someone says this and asks the question, I would think that companies who have type C gathering may want to designate as transmission lines in order to alleviate some burdensome regulations. For example, leak surveys with leak detection equipment versus visual leak survey for transmission. Is this possible? And are there any regulatory advantages for claiming transmission rather than gathering?
Let me see.
Now, maybe that Warren needs to research and get back.
Yeah, I need to research that one. I'll get back to him or her on that because I don't, off the top of my head, I'd have to really research that to give you a valid answer.
It's a great question. So if we have to do that, great question. Someone is asking, will the recording be available following the webinar? And yes, we, for the first time, we'll be posting this online. You'll get a message and a link to the recording. Another viewer asks, will any of these changes affect pipeline contractors or provide opportunities? And I imagine the answer is yes.
Well, if the contractors are doing the work, certainly, again, they're supposed to be using operator procedures. Mm-hmm. Your procedures are going to have to dictate what they do on your pipeline. So again, don't certainly, there may be third parties that do the DCBG and other types of surveys that you utilize, and you may accept their procedures. But again, making sure you've got operator approved procedures that any contractor follows, very important.
We used, so in a statement, we used to have 10 years to complete a baseline assessment on new covered segments. Does this now 6-month baseline assessment start the assessment schedule, or is that still upon, I guess, what like you put it, the energizing of the pipeline?
It may. Again, that'd be one for PHMSA. Hopefully will provide guidance, because this is really just for the assessment of the of the condition, put it in a baseline, because a lot of operators never had a baseline assessment of, anything, let alone where their coding was. And again, it's just one added layer to, try to make sure that the pipes are in good condition. I would have, if I was going to make an assumption, I would say, yeah, you've done this, you've made the repair 10 years from that point, or 7 years, whatever it is, then you would be looking for your next assessment. But that's me, not PHMSA.
So ask your regulator, wait for guidance.
Yeah.
One more question. Someone did ask, will the slides be made available? We will be making this recording available, and you'll get a link. Do you think, Warren, the new term distribution center in regard to the term customer meter, in parentheses MSA, affects OQ training and qualifications? I guess he's asking, how do you think distribution center may affect qualifications in regards to customer meters?
And the MSA, I guess, is a master service agreement. Sorry, my guess would be that operators are still going to be, responsible for the inspection. A lot of states still require that, even though it may be customer piping. But what I'll do is I'll do a little research and get back on that one also, just to make sure I've got it.
All right, we have one other question. It's a little bit off topic, but let's ask it. Are master meter operators still exempt from DIMP?
Currently, master meter operators are exempt. I will tell you that I've heard this rumblings that there's going to be some things coming out this year that's going to affect distribution. There may be even some criteria that is in the makings. So we will have to see what changes occur this year, and certainly if something were to come out, whether it's an NPRM or a final rule, we will try to get something together and address that in a webinar as soon as possible.
Thank you, Warren. Yes, and I happened to attend a recent American Public Gas Association meeting where it was, which the staff members there have a great relationship with PHMSA staff. They keep in contact all the time, and they said they're just waiting for the shoe to drop for more rulemaking. They said that PHMSA staff says that reauthorization in 2019, those congressional mandates, it's time to make all those real at PHMSA. So they are anticipating an NPRM on distribution. They also said that the SMS info gathering, so PSMS, that should be coming out any week now, where they're voluntarily asking for operators, how, have you started, how deep have you gone with PSMS, those kind of questions. And there was a lot of talk of, and they recommend to their members, fill that out, because there's a lot of talk and worry that if operators are not voluntarily entering into PSMS, that'll become regulation. So there's that little tidbit of info, and they're expecting leak and repair NPRM as well this year, and so I think we'll see some regulation change happen, and we'll be covering it in these webinars. So Warren, thank you again. Sorry folks, we had technical difficulty with Warren's webcam, but what a great session. I learned a lot. I got a lot out of it. Warren, thank you for your time today, sharing your experience, and for the time it took to go through these PHMSA updates and all the new repair criteria for pipelines. To your audience, thank you as well for being with us. Please, we get a lot of value off of your feedback. We hope we're providing you value with this information. And we know that we've started some conversations with many of you, and some of you are, so please engage with us. We encourage that. If you have questions or concerns about your own operations regarding these changes, or in general, Warren Miller and our ITS team offer a range of consulting services, so ask us, maybe we can help out. We have our next webinar in the Regulation Navigation series slated for May 24th. So coming up here in a couple months, registration is now live. We'll be sending out, or you can get to that now by going to itstraining.com/home/regnav to sign up right away, but we'll be sending out more information. We still haven't established a topic because we're kind of waiting to see what is the most timely subject to cover. And so if you have ideas, you have questions, again, engage with us, send them in. We hope you continue to join us for the upcoming sessions. And again, thank you. Stay safe out there.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Warren.